In the calm stillness of a gentle medieval morning, when the sky is covered in a pale grey light that softens every edge of the manor grounds, the kitchen gardens rest in a quiet that feels steady and familiar. The year is settled somewhere in the middle of the 14th century, though in the peaceful rhythm of the manor's daily life, time moves in a slow and unhurried way, marked more by the seasons than by numbered years. The air carries a faint coolness that clings to woolen garments and lingers under the low eaves of the outbuildings, and a thin mist curls along the edges of the fields in long, steady ribbons. It drapes itself around the garden walls, softening the outlines of the stone and making the world feel hushed and enclosed. This is the hour when the first steps of the day sound against the packed earth paths, muted by dew and softened by the gentle pace of workers who rise before the manor fully wakes. The kitchen gardens sit close to the main hall, positioned with intention so that herbs, vegetables, and stored supplies do not need to travel far to reach the cooks who spend their days tending simmering pots and steady hearth fires. The location reflects a long-established and practical design, one shared by many manor estates of the period. A garden close to the kitchen shortens the distance during the colder months, when carrying bundles through wind or snow is best avoided whenever possible. It also keeps the plants under watchful eyes, since these herbs and vegetables hold tangible value for the manor's economy. In this quiet morning light, the garden's broad layout can be seen clearly, even though the air hangs thick with early mist. It stretches in a long rectangle, measuring about 30 paces from end to end, with a narrower width of around 15 paces. It is enclosed by a low stone wall of roughly 1 meter in height, composed of smooth river stones and patches of moss that have established themselves over the seasons. Inside the walls, neat divisions mark where different herbs grow. It was common for medieval gardeners to use raised beds edged with wood or wattle fencing to contain soil and keep it from washing away during rainfall. Some beds measure only 1 meter across, while others span nearly 2 meters, though none are so wide that a person cannot reach to their center while standing at the edge. In this way, the garden avoids the need for anyone to step upon the beds themselves, preserving the soil's loose structure and making it easier to maintain. Between the beds, narrow paths of trampled earth stretch like thin strips that guide the way from one section to another. They often measure only the width of a single footfall, with a little extra space on either side for skirts or tunics to brush against herbs without breaking delicate stems. On this morning, the garden is heavy with the scent of damp soil. It rises from the earth itself, mingling with the brightness of herbs that were touched by dew overnight. The air carries notes of rosemary, which holds its fragrance even in colder weather, and the gentler sweetness of marjoram. A faint peppery scent from young mustard plants lingers near the center beds, and an almost grassy aroma drifts up from clumps of chives where fine droplets of moisture cling to the hollow stalks. These scents do not feel strong or overwhelming. Instead, they create a slow rising background of fragrance that settles into the calmness of the scene. The garden workers who tend this space arrive quietly. Their footsteps are unhurried, and their movements are softened by years of practice. They know the importance of consistent, gentle motion that does not disturb the stillness of the early hours. They wear woolen tunics dyed in muted shades of brown or green, fabrics that absorb the morning light rather than reflect it. Coarse linen shirts sit beneath the wool for comfort, and the woolen hoods draped over their shoulders can be drawn up if the breeze becomes sharper. Their shoes are simple leather, shaped by long use and steadied by thick soles that help keep the cold of damp ground from seeping into their feet. One of the workers carries a woven basket made of willow strips. Its surface bears the slightly glossy sheen that develops from being handled frequently. The structure is firm but flexible, able to bend without breaking, and its shape widens at the top so that harvested herbs can be laid softly inside without being crushed. Another worker brings a simple knife with a narrow blade that tapers to a point. The metal is iron, slightly darkened by age, and the handle is carved from smooth beech wood. It fits easily in the hand and is used more for trimming stems and cutting twine than for heavy work. A third worker carries a length of hemp twine wound around a wooden spindle. This twine is strong in a quiet, reliable way, made by twisting long fibers together until they form a smooth, even rope. The workers gather near the rosemary bed, where the plants hold their shape well into the cooler months. Rosemary thrives in the kind of mild, well-drained soil found in many manor gardens. Its woody stems grow upright, with narrow leaves that shimmer slightly when touched by dew. The workers appreciate rosemary for its uses in cooking, in cleaning, and even in the manor's simple remedies. Its scent is linked with meals prepared in winter, when preserved meats or root vegetables often benefit from its pine-like aroma. And so, even though the morning is quiet, there is a sense of steady purpose as the workers kneel beside the plants. Harvesting rosemary in the 14th century is done with care. The workers do not rush, because each stem has its place in the seasonal rhythm of the garden. One worker gently lifts a branch between their fingers, feeling the firmness that indicates it has grown long enough to be clipped. The iron knife blade glides along the stem just above a small cluster of new growth. This ensures that the plant continues to thrive, sending out fresh shoots in the next growing season. The sound of the cut is soft, a faint snap that blends with the gentle rustling of nearby leaves. Each clipped stem is laid in the willow basket, arranged in a neat line so that the leaves do not become tangled. The process continues in a calm, rhythmic pace, allowing the morning to unfold with slow steadiness. Nearby, the thyme bed has a different texture. Thyme grows close to the ground, forming small cushions of tiny leaves. The plants spread outward rather than upward, and the leaves are finer and more delicate than those of rosemary. Harvesting thyme often involves pinching small sprigs between the fingers or using shears to trim larger clusters. The workers move carefully, spreading the branches gently to avoid uprooting the low-growing stems. The scent that rises from thyme is softer, almost like a warm breath of earth and sun combined. It settles lightly in the air, creating a sense of familiarity that stretches across generations of gardeners who have tended similar plants. In these early hours, birds begin to stir in the hedgerows beyond the garden walls. Their calls remain subdued, as if the world has not yet fully awakened. A gentle cooing from wood pigeons drifts across the fields, while the faint flutter of sparrows echoes near the thatched roof of the nearby stable. These sounds sit in harmony with the steady rustle of herbs. Even the faint dripping of moisture from the eaves adds to the calmness of the garden's morning rhythm. Along one of the longer beds grows sage, a plant with soft, velvety leaves that hold a muted grey-green color. The texture of sage makes it easy to identify even with one's eyes closed. A brush of the fingers across its surface leaves a lingering scent that is strong but grounding. In the 14th century, sage is valued not only in cooking but also for its practical uses in preserving certain foods. Its leaves can be dried and powdered or stored whole, depending on how they will be used during winter. The workers move along the sage bed with slow consistency, selecting leaves that show no signs of browning or weather damage. Each leaf is taken with a gentle pinch, breaking the stem cleanly. These leaves are placed in separate baskets, because sage will later be dried in a different manner than rosemary and thyme. After some time, when the baskets hold a modest but sufficient collection of clippings, The workers rise and move toward a small shelter standing near the garden wall. It is a simple open-sided structure with a slanted wooden roof supported by beams that have been smoothed over time. Within this shelter stands a sturdy wooden table of oak, measuring roughly 1.5 meters in length and about 0.5 meters in width. Its surface is worn from years of use, marked by the faint impressions of knife blades, bundles of herbs, and scattered seeds. This is where the herbs are sorted and prepared for drying. The morning light filters through the beams, creating a soft and diffused glow across the table. A faint breeze moves through the shelter, carrying away any excess moisture and helping the herbs remain fresh. The workers empty the baskets one at a time, placing the herbs in tidy piles on the table. Rosemary stems are lined up parallel to each other, their tips pointing in the same direction. Thyme sprigs are collected into small bundles, their delicate leaves forming a textured surface that catches the light. Sage leaves are arranged flat so that they do not bend or curl before drying. Once the herbs are arranged, the workers begin the slow process of tying them into bundles. The hemp twine is cut into lengths of about 20 centimeters, long enough to wrap around each bundle several times. The workers wrap the twine with a loose but secure tension, aware that the herbs will shrink slightly as they dry. Too tight a knot might damage the stems, while too loose a knot might cause the bundle to slip apart. The completed bundles are hung from wooden pegs fixed to the beams above. They hang at varying heights, but none are too close together, allowing air to move freely around them. The shelter's position is intentional. It faces east, receiving gentle morning light but avoiding direct sun in the midday hours. Too much sun could dry the herbs too quickly, causing them to lose their color or flavor. The workers know this from experience learned not by instruction but by years of watching plants respond to their environment. The drying process often continues for several days or weeks, depending on the herb, the thickness of the stems, and the weather. In this season, with the cooler air settling in, the drying process is slower and more even. Beyond the drying shelter, another area of the garden is dedicated to seed saving. This practice is central to maintaining the continuity of the manor's food supply. Seeds from certain herbs, vegetables, and flowers must be collected at the right moment in the season, then cleaned, dried, and stored carefully so that the next year's garden can be planted without needing to purchase or barter for new supplies. Seed saving requires patience and attention to detail, values that align well with the steady character of the garden workers. One of the seed beds contains dill, which grows tall with feathery leaves and delicate yellow flower heads. By this time in the season, the dill heads have dried into light brown umbels, each containing numerous small seeds. These seeds hold the familiar aroma associated with dill, though when dried they carry a deeper, more earthy scent. The workers gently bend the stems over a wide cloth laid on the ground, a cloth made from coarse linen with a tight weave that prevents small seeds from slipping through. With a soft tapping motion, they coax the seeds from the umbels. The seeds fall in a gentle stream, making a faint pattering sound that mixes with the rustle of leaves overhead. Elsewhere, coriander plants stand with stiff, upright stems. Their seed heads contain small, round seeds that must be collected after they reach a uniform dryness. The workers inspect each head to ensure that the seeds have turned a light brown color, indicating readiness. The seeds are picked by hand, rolled lightly between the fingers to detach them from their stems. Their scent is faint but warm, adding a subtle depth to the air around the seed beds. The seeds are sorted by type and placed in small wooden bowls. These bowls are carved from alder wood, chosen because it resists warping and provides a stable container in varying temperatures. Each bowl holds a particular variety: dill seeds in one, coriander seeds in another, and mustard seeds in yet another. As the workers gather the bowls, they move toward a storage building located near the edge of the gardens. This building is a simple structure made of timber and wattle, its roof covered in thatch that insulates it against both heat and cold. The walls are lined inside with wooden shelves, each shelf made from wide planks of oak or chestnut. These shelves hold jars, pots, and cloth-wrapped bundles. The air inside the building is dry and still, ideal for storing seeds and dried herbs. The temperature remains steady because of the thick thatch and insulated walls, and the interior carries a faint scent of dried plants, wood, and dust. The seeds collected today will be added to the manor's existing stores. They will be spread on clean cloths inside the building, where they will rest for several days to ensure they lose any remaining moisture before being transferred into clay jars. These jars are made from local clay, shaped on a wheel by craftsmen who understand the importance of uniform thickness. Each jar has a smooth interior and a slightly roughened exterior, making it easier to grip. The jars are sealed with simple wooden lids or pieces of cloth tied with twine. These coverings prevent insects from entering while still allowing a minimal amount of air exchange, which is necessary to keep the seeds from becoming musty. As the workers move through these tasks, the morning gradually stretches toward midday. The sun rises higher, though its light remains soft through the thin veil of lingering haze. The temperature increases only slightly, enough to remove the chill from the air but not so much that the workers feel discomfort. The stillness of the garden remains, shaped by the steady pace of work and the quiet atmosphere that defines life in this place. In the far corner of the garden, beyond the herb beds and drying shelter, lies a small plot dedicated to winter storage preparations. This area is used for preparing root vegetables and hardy herbs that will be preserved through colder months. The plot contains shallow pits lined with straw, dug into the earth with a diameter of about 1 meter each. These pits are used to store vegetables like carrots and parsnips, which are layered with straw and covered with soil to protect them from frost. The pits are not used every day, but the workers maintain them throughout the season, checking that the straw remains dry and that the coverings are secure. Nearby stands a wooden structure used for storing herbs that are less suited to hanging. Inside this structure, which resembles a small cupboard, herbs are laid flat on lattice frames made from thin wooden slats. These slats allow air to circulate evenly around the herbs, which is important for preventing mold. The workers place the sage leaves collected earlier on one of the lattice frames. Each leaf is spread out carefully, not touching its neighbors. The frame is then slid into the structure, where it will remain until the sage has dried fully, a process that can take several weeks in cooler weather. Throughout the day, the workers return to the herb beds to gather small amounts of plants that need to be harvested at precise times. They collect chives by cutting the hollow stems near their base, leaving enough of the plant intact for regeneration. They gather parsley, choosing only the outer leaves so that the inner ones can continue to grow. They observe the mint beds, checking for any signs of fading color that indicate the leaves are ready to be clipped. Each plant has its own rhythm, its own cycle, and the workers follow these cycles with a quiet and steady familiarity. As afternoon approaches, the light softens again, shifting to a golden hue that pools gently over the garden walls. The air cools slightly, and the shadows grow longer. The workers continue their tasks without hurry, knowing that the day's work is shaped not by deadlines but by the natural pacing of the season. There is a deep sense of continuity here, where each task connects to the ones completed yesterday and the ones waiting for tomorrow. By late afternoon, the workers gather near the drying shelter once more. They take a moment to review the bundles of rosemary and thyme hanging from the beams. The herbs have begun their slow transformation, their leaves losing some of their initial brightness but gaining a concentrated fragrance that signals the early stages of preservation. The workers note these changes quietly, recognizing them as part of the steady daily flow. The garden settles into evening with a gradual softening of sounds. Birds quiet their calls. The breeze slows to a gentle drift. The herbs sway slightly, as if acknowledging the close of the day. The workers finish their tasks, setting tools aside on the wooden table in neat, tidy arrangements. The garden is left in the same calm state in which it began the morning, ready to rest through the night. And as the final light of the day fades beyond the fields, the kitchen gardens remain a quiet and steady presence within the manor grounds, holding their slow, unhurried rhythm that carries through each season with gentle consistency. In the gentle continuity of the manor's quiet gardens, the story moves onward, drifting deeper into the soft, unhurried rhythms that shape the kitchen plots during the middle months of the growing season. The hours stretch slowly here, and the tasks are carried out with a sense of patient repetition that feels both timeless and reassuring. The gardens remain enclosed by their low wattle fences, each hurdle woven from pliant hazel rods, each stake pressed into the earth with care. The soil within those enclosures carries the warmth of earlier days, and even as the year edges toward the gentler decline of late summer, the ground still breathes out a faint and steady heat that rises in small currents during the quiet parts of morning. In this part of the story, the sun hangs a little lower than it did in the early season described before, and the shadows of the herb beds stretch longer, though they do so in a slow and graceful way. Nothing changes quickly here. The plants have grown taller, fuller, and their leaves show the layered textures that come from weeks of absorbing warm rain, intermittent breezes, and the steady rhythm of tending hands. The gardeners move at a quiet pace, never hurrying themselves, for the work does not benefit from speed. Instead, each gesture is measured, gentle, and in keeping with the calming pace that shapes life in the manor's kitchen gardens. At this time of year, the herbs are nearing their moment of prime harvest. The stems are strong, the leaves mature, and the scents drift lazily in the warm air. Even when there is no wind, a faint fragrance rises from the beds simply because the day itself warms the oils within the leaves. The gardeners have learned to read these signs. They know that an herb nearing harvest carries a weight in its stem that differs slightly from its earlier growth, as if the plant itself holds its essential properties more firmly. So they move closer, observing each bed with slow, patient eyes. They observe the small differences in color, in the soft folding of the leaves, in the texture of the stems, and in the faint shimmer that lies upon the surface of the plants when the light glances across them in the early afternoon. The kitchen garden of a 14th-century manor typically contains a variety of herbs, each grown for a calm and specific purpose. There are herbs for cooking, herbs for healing, herbs for preserving food, herbs merely for scenting the air or freshening linens, and herbs chosen for their usefulness in warding off insects or discouraging small animals from disturbing the beds. The layout is arranged in a way that encourages practical movement. Beds of similar height are grouped together. Plants with sprawling leaves are given space to spread outward. Plants with tall stems stand nearer the protective inner fence, where they gain some support from the warm, woven barriers. The soil has been enriched with layers of animal manure and kitchen scraps that have decomposed over the previous months. The consistency is crumbly, soft, and slightly moist, releasing a faint earthy aroma whenever a gardener gently parts the surface with the tip of a wooden tool. In this period of the season, the herb beds display a slow fullness. Sage leaves have grown broad and soft, with a velvety surface that catches the dust of the dry days and holds dew on the cool mornings. The thyme lies low but dense, forming a spreading mound of countless tiny leaves. The rosemary stands upright with its narrow, pointed leaves that shine almost silver in the sun. The parsley has put out several layers of frilled green, and the chives lift their thin, tubular stalks above the other low-growing plants. At the corners of some beds, one might find the tall umbels of dill or fennel, rising in airy patterns that sway with even the faintest breeze. And along the walkway that separates the beds, lavender grows in a modest row, its soft purple-grey blooms trembling slightly each time someone passes. Herb harvesting during this season is calm, methodical, and guided by long experience. The gardeners know that the essential oils within the herbs are most concentrated in the late morning, after the sun has lifted the dew but before the heat of midday grows too strong. So they carry simple tools with them, usually a small knife with a plain wooden handle or a pair of shears with iron blades shaped in the uncomplicated style of the period. The shears are slightly heavy, but their weight is used to maintain a steady cut. The blades do not snap quickly. Instead, they move with a slow pressure that slices the stems cleanly. The gardeners often sharpen the blades on smooth stones or simple whetstones that are kept in the storage shed. The sharpening itself is done with an unhurried motion, a back and forth rhythm that produces a faint rasping sound. This sound mixes gently with the rustle of leaves, the soft footfalls on packed earth, and the distant lowing of cattle in the manor's outer fields. To harvest sage, the gardeners choose stems that have grown firm but still tender. They pinch the stem lightly between two fingers, feeling its resistance, then make a slow cut just above a node where new growth is likely to form. They gather the stems in loose bundles that they tie with thin cords of flax. The cords are soft and pliant, and they hold the stems gently without crushing them. The bundles are laid on low wooden trays lined with clean cloth. The cloth is woven from coarse linen fibers, and its texture keeps the herbs from slipping. The gardeners place the trays in shaded spots beneath the eaves of the storeroom or under simple lean-to shelters built from rough-hewn timber. These shelters allow air to move freely over the herbs while shielding them from direct sunshine, which might cause the oils to evaporate too quickly. Thyme is harvested in a slightly different way. Since the plant grows low and spreading, the gardeners use a small curved knife to gather several sprigs at once. They slide the blade beneath the stems, lifting them softly before making the cut. Thyme is placed on wider trays with spaces between each sprig, since airflow is important. The tiny leaves must dry evenly so that mold does not develop. Over the course of several days, the thyme will shrink slightly, its leaves darkening in color. The gardeners know that thyme must be handled delicately during drying, for the leaves detach easily from the stems. So they rarely turn the herb. Instead, they let the air do its work. The fragrance surrounding the drying thyme is gentle and steady, hanging in the air like a thin cloud that drifts slowly through the shaded areas. Lavender is treated with a reverent slowness. Its scent is prized, not only for its calming qualities but also for its usefulness in the household. It is used to freshen linens, to scent rooms, and to deter small insects. The gardeners cut lavender before the blooms fully open, when the scent is strongest. They gather long stems, binding them into slightly larger bundles than those used for sage. Lavender dries well when hung upside down, so the gardeners tie the bundles and suspend them from beams under the storage eaves. The flowers point downward, and over time, they dry into a soft, muted purple. When the air warms in the afternoon, the faint aroma drifts outward, mingling with the earthy smells of soil, straw, and the wooden structures of the manor. Every herb has its own rhythm, and the gardeners understand these rhythms in a quiet and patient way. Their knowledge has been passed through many seasons, and although the methods are simple, they carry a sense of deep tradition. Nothing is rushed. Nothing is forced. The harvesting takes place over several days, with each bed visited in turn. The work blends seamlessly into the shape of the day, joined by other tasks such as watering the newly sown patches, removing spent blossoms, and checking for signs of unwanted insects. The gardeners rarely speak during these tasks, not because silence is required, but because the calm atmosphere encourages long stretches of reflection. The manor kitchen itself relies on these herbs throughout the year, so care is taken to ensure a plentiful supply. The cook visits the garden from time to time, observing the progress with a gentle interest. The cook's garments rustle softly as they walk along the narrow paths. Their hands often carry a small basket woven from willow, which they use to gather fresh herbs for immediate use. The basket is shallow, with an open weave that allows air to move around the herbs, keeping them from wilting before they are brought into the warm kitchen. The cook knows the herbs not only by appearance but by scent and taste, and their familiarity guides the selection. The manor's meals rely on these subtle flavors, and each herb adds a distinct note to the stews, broths, or roasted meats that might appear on the long wooden tables of the hall. In the middle portion of the growing season, seed saving begins in a subtle, early form. Not all plants are harvested fully. Some are allowed to keep growing, developing their flowers and eventually their seeds. The gardeners choose plants that have shown strong growth, good color, and resilience. These plants are marked with small strips of cloth tied around a low stem or with tiny wooden stakes pressed gently into the soil near the base. The markers are plain but functional. They remind the gardeners to leave these particular plants undisturbed for the rest of the season. When seed saving is considered, the gardeners observe the plants closely, noting which flowers form seed heads that are full and healthy. They let the sun and wind dry them naturally. A seed head changes slowly, over many days. It shifts from soft and green to firm and dry. As it matures, the outer layers become papery, and a faint rattling sound can sometimes be heard when the wind passes through. The gardeners wait for this moment, for the seeds held inside will be at the right stage for gathering. The seeds will fill the hands with a pleasant weight, small but numerous. They may vary in color depending on the plant. Some are pale and round. Others are long and thin. Still others are dark and slightly ridged. Each one holds the potential for next year's garden, a quiet promise of continuity. The process of removing the seeds is done with slow, gentle motions. The gardeners hold a wide, shallow bowl made of wood. The interior of the bowl is smooth, with a slightly raised grain that comes from years of use. When a seed head is shaken lightly over the bowl, the seeds fall into it with a soft, dry sound. This sound is faint but distinctive, like grains of sand sliding across a wooden surface. The gardeners enjoy this sound, for it marks the steady progress of the season. After the seeds have been shaken free, the gardeners blow gently across them, letting the light chaff drift away. The heavier seeds remain in the bowl. The process is simple, yet it requires a steady hand and a calm focus. These seeds will later be stored in small pouches made from linen or wool. The cloth is woven tightly enough to hold the seeds securely, but loosely enough to let air circulate. The pouches are tied with cords, each one labeled by a small tag made of parchment or wooden slivers. The writing on the tags is plain and functional. Most gardeners of the period could not write, so labeling might be done by the steward or another literate member of the household. Sometimes, instead of writing, the gardeners use symbol marks or subtle notches on the wooden tags to indicate which seeds lie inside. The tags are then hung in a small storage cupboard, where the pouches are arranged neatly, one beside the other, waiting for the following spring. As the season advances, the manor's kitchen garden shifts in character. The early brightness of growth makes way for deeper shades of green and the gentle heaviness of mature plants. The soil remains warm, but it loses some of its early season softness. Footsteps on the paths sound slightly firmer, as if the ground has settled into a restful contentment. The air holds the scent of herbs drying, soil warming, and occasionally the soft sweetness of fruit ripening in nearby orchards. The soundscape remains calm, filled with the rustle of leaves, the quiet hum of insects, and the distant clatter of kitchen work carried by soft breezes. In the garden storage spaces, herbs continue their slow process of drying. The trays beneath the eaves fill with more bundles each day. The gardeners check them regularly, lifting the edges of the cloths to observe the progress. They do so with light motions, avoiding any disruption to the delicate leaves. Drying herbs need airflow, not disturbance. Over time, the trays take on the combined fragrance of the different plants, blending into a mellow scent that signals the approach of the harvest season. This part of the year allows the gardeners to reflect on the broader rhythm of their work. Every task has its place, and each action contributes to the cycle that sustains the manor household. The gardens do not exist simply for decoration. They provide essential ingredients for meals, medicines, and household necessities. The herbs gathered here will influence the health and comfort of the household through the colder months. They will flavor stews that simmer in the kitchens, fill sachets that rest in linen chests, and infuse simple remedies prepared by the household healer. All these uses contribute to the quiet importance of the herb beds. Within the garden, one can observe small details that would otherwise be unnoticed. The way the shadows shift between the rows of rosemary. The faint crackle of dry dill seeds falling into a wooden bowl. The way chive stalks bend slightly under their own weight, forming soft arcs that rise again when the breeze touches them. The surface of the soil shows tiny fissures formed from days of wind and sun. The surface feels warm and dry, yet just below lies cooler, moister earth that retains the memory of earlier rains. When the gardeners use their simple wooden hose to loosen the soil, they do so with quiet strokes that reveal these layers of texture. It is common at this time of year for the gardeners to perform gentle pruning on the larger plants. They do not cut heavily. Instead, they trim back stems that have grown too long or leaves that have become shaded by taller plants. These small adjustments encourage airflow and ensure that the herbs do not crowd one another. Crowding can lead to mildew in the wetter days of autumn, so the gardeners aim to prevent such conditions. The pruning tools are small and often handmade. A wooden handle fits comfortably into the palm, and the iron blade is curved to match the natural arc of a cutting motion. When used, it makes a soft slicing sound. The trimmed leaves fall quietly to the soil, where they decompose slowly, releasing their mild fragrance back into the garden. One of the most calming sights within the garden during this part of the season is the gentle bending of the herb stalks in the breeze. Even on still days, the taller plants sway slightly, responding to subtle air movements that are often too faint to feel. The effect is soothing, creating the impression of a garden always in motion, though never in haste. The gardeners often pause to observe this movement, not from distraction, but because it helps them understand the health of the plants. A stiff or motionless plant might indicate that the stem has become too woody or that the soil beneath has compacted. A smooth sway suggests resilience, flexibility, and steady growth. Around this time, preparations for winter storage begin quietly. The gardeners sort through their tools, checking each one for wear. Handles are tightened. Blades are cleaned and rubbed with oil. Storage spaces are cleared of last season's remnants. Wooden shelves are wiped with cloths dampened with warm water, removing dust that has settled over the months. The storerooms smell of dry wood, herbs, and the faint scent of flax rope. These rooms maintain a cool, stable temperature that is ideal for storing dried herbs and seeds. The stone walls hold the coolness from evenings, and the small windows allow only a dim light to enter, preventing unnecessary heat from accumulating. Baskets used for carrying herbs are inspected as well. They are woven from willow or hazel, with patterns that create sturdy frameworks. Some are shallow, meant for fresh herbs. Others are deeper and used for storing root vegetables later in the year. The baskets must be kept dry so that they do not warp or mold. If any strands have broken, they are repaired by weaving new pieces through the gaps. The process of basket repair is slow and rhythmic. The gardener soaks the new strips in water to make them pliant, then threads them through the existing weave, pulling gently to align them with the pattern. This creates a satisfying tension that holds the structure firm. Even as these preparations begin, the main herb harvest continues. The garden remains at the height of its productivity, offering stems, leaves, flowers, and seeds in abundance. Each day adds a new layer of scent to the air. In the early morning, the fragrance is mild and fresh, shaped by dew and cool temperatures. By midday, the scents deepen, becoming richer as the herbs warm. In the evening, as the air cools once more, the fragrances soften again, blending into the calm atmosphere that settles over the manor grounds. The gardeners' movements match these natural rhythms. They adjust their tasks according to the feel of the day. In warm mornings, they may water the beds lightly, using wooden buckets filled at the nearby well. The water is cool and clear, drawn with a rope that creaks softly as it moves over the pulley. The gardeners pour the water slowly, aiming for the base of each plant so that the leaves remain dry. Wet leaves in late summer can attract mildew when the nights turn cooler. The soil absorbs the water with a faint sound, and the earth darkens slightly, releasing a faint scent of freshness. In the afternoons, when the sun is warmest, the gardeners may retreat to shaded areas to sort seeds or tie herb bundles. The shade is created by simple wooden structures or by the overhang of the storeroom roof. The dust motes in the air move slowly in the filtered light. The soundscape becomes still, with only the soft noises of hands on herbs or the quiet creak of wooden benches. The slow pace of these tasks encourages a sense of reflection. The gardeners often think about the previous seasons, about plants that thrived or struggled, and about the adjustments they might make in the next year. They think of the weather, the soil, the pattern of rains, and the subtle cues given by the plants themselves. Their knowledge grows quietly, season by season, shaped by consistent observation. Late in this period, the herb beds show signs of gradual change. Some leaves begin to take on slightly deeper hues, or edges that curl gently. These are subtle reminders that the peak of the season has passed and that the transition to autumn approaches. Yet the days remain warm enough for the plants to continue offering their bounty. The manor household counts on this steady supply, and the gardeners continue their routines without hurry. This part of the garden's life holds a special calmness. It rests in the space between fullness and decline, between growth and rest. Every herb seems to know its place within this rhythm. The sage remains steady and grounded. The thyme spreads in its low cushion. The rosemary stands tall. The lavender fades gently from bloom to seed. Each plant offers what it can, and the gardeners accept it with quiet gratitude. There is no need for haste, for the season itself unfolds at a pace that feels natural and soothing. The garden's quiet presence brings a sense of calm to the surrounding manor. The sounds of daily life in the hall, the stable, the kitchen, and the fields all coexist with the garden's tranquil atmosphere. People pass by on small errands, carrying baskets, tools, or bundles of wood. Their steps remain steady and unhurried. The garden, with its scents and textures, becomes a place of subtle rest even during work. As this part of the story draws onward, the light in the garden softens. The late-season sun casts a warm glow across the tops of the herb beds, creating long shadows that stretch across the soil. The air cools slightly, carrying with it the promise of evening. The fragrance of herbs lingers, drifting gently between the rows. The storerooms hold their quiet bounty. The seeds rest in their pouches. The trays hold their drying leaves. And the gardeners finish their tasks for the day, knowing that the rhythm will continue tomorrow with the same slow, steady grace. And so, this section of the story settles into the peaceful stillness of a late summer evening in the 14th-century manor garden. Everything remains calm. Everything remains steady. The cycle continues, softened by time, shaped by tradition, and carried forward by hands that work with patience and care. The morning light was soft as it crept over the low stone walls of the manor, filtering through the latticed windows of the kitchen gardens. The air was cool, and a delicate mist lingered over the soil, dampening the paths worn smooth by centuries of careful footsteps. It was in this early hour, when the world was still hushed and the sounds of labor had not yet begun, that the gardeners moved quietly among the rows of herbs and vegetables, their movements deliberate, their voices subdued to whispers, as though to not disturb the stillness of the earth itself. The morning dew clung to the leaves of sage and thyme, each droplet reflecting the pale light and trembling slightly as the gardener's fingers brushed past. The sensation of damp soil beneath soft leather boots was gentle, yielding, and the smell of the wet earth mingled with the faintly sharp aroma of fresh herbs, creating a calm, steady rhythm that marked the beginning of the day. The gardeners began with the harvest of the tender herbs, the ones used most often in daily cooking, those that would not survive long if left unattended. Sage was gathered first. Its leaves were thick, velvety, and cool to the touch. The gardener's fingers moved with care, plucking only the outermost leaves, leaving the inner growth to continue for the season. This careful selection was customary, ensuring that the plant would remain healthy and productive. Each bundle was modest, tied with thin strips of hemp, which were soaked the day before to prevent splitting and to make them pliable. The rope smelled faintly of grass and the river reeds from which it had been fashioned. Bundles were carried to the preparation table, a low wooden bench worn smooth by years of work, where they were sorted and laid out to dry. The drying process was meticulous. The bundles were suspended from horizontal beams in the herb house, a small structure at the edge of the garden, open to the gentle movement of air but sheltered from the harsh winter winds. The beams themselves were carved from oak, sturdy and unyielding, their surfaces absorbing the faint fragrance of rosemary, marjoram, and thyme that had been stored before. Air moved slowly through the gaps in the walls, carrying the scent and ensuring that the leaves would dry evenly, preserving both flavor and medicinal properties. Nearby, lavender was harvested, its stalks cut just above the woody base with shears sharpened by hand. Each stalk was gathered carefully, brushed free of loose soil, and arranged in small sheaves. The flowers were dense and firm, their gentle purple hue muted by the pale light of the morning. Lavender was used not only for cooking but also for the household's comfort, placed between linens or in small pouches to scent clothing and bedding. The fragrance was subtle but persistent, soothing to the senses, and it was common for the gardeners to pause occasionally to inhale the gentle aroma, a brief moment of calm in the structured day. As the morning progressed, attention turned to the preparation of seeds for the coming planting seasons. Seed saving was a practice both practical and revered, a quiet act of continuity in the life of the manor. Beans were the first to be gathered, their pods dry and brittle, rattling faintly when shaken. Each pod was split with care, the seeds brushed clean and examined for imperfections. A small, shallow wooden tray was used for this process, its surface smooth and polished from repeated use. The seeds were spread thinly, the lighter, shriveled ones discarded, and the robust, plump seeds set aside for storage. Small, hand-stitched cloth bags were prepared to hold them, each labeled with a string of hemp and a simple knot to denote the type of bean, the year, and the section of the garden from which it had come. The gardener's hands moved slowly, deliberately, the act of sorting providing a meditative rhythm. The faint smell of dried bean husks mingled with the cooler, damp air of the morning, creating a gentle olfactory backdrop to the task. Carrots and parsnips were unearthed more slowly. The soil clung to the roots, moist and rich, and each one was gently loosened with a small iron fork. The texture of the earth was soft yet granular, and when the roots were lifted, small clumps of soil fell away in quiet little showers, dusting the wooden bench with fine particles that would later be brushed aside. The roots were cleaned with water drawn from the stone well, the cold liquid running over the skin of the vegetables, smoothing them and removing the last traces of soil. Once cleaned, they were laid on straw mats to dry. This process, slow and methodical, preserved the vegetables for winter, preventing rot and ensuring that the household would have a steady supply when the earth itself lay dormant under frost and snow. The sensory world of the garden was rich yet calm. The gentle rustling of leaves as the wind passed through the rows, the muted tapping of shears against wooden handles, the soft splash of water over roots, and the faint scent of earth and drying herbs combined to create a continuous, soothing rhythm. Occasionally, a bird would call from the edge of the orchard, its note clear and soft, a fleeting interruption that passed without urgency. The light shifted gradually, moving across the beds in a slow arc, highlighting the textures of leaves, stems, and soil, and casting pale shadows that lengthened with the morning. The gardeners, moving quietly among their tasks, were attuned to this rhythm, and their work mirrored it, steady and unhurried, without the imposition of haste. By mid-morning, the focus turned to the preservation of more delicate herbs, such as parsley and chervil. These herbs were gathered in smaller quantities, their leaves tender and prone to bruising. Each sprig was rinsed gently, excess water shaken away, and then spread upon soft linen cloths to air dry. This step required patience, as even the smallest droplet left on the leaf could cause decay during storage. The texture of the herbs was light, almost feathery, and the gardener's fingers traced the contours of each leaf, familiar with the subtle differences that indicated freshness or decline. Once dried, the herbs were bundled and hung in the upper rafters of the herb house, where the air moved slowly and the temperature remained steady, neither too warm nor too cold. This method had been passed down through generations, a quiet accumulation of knowledge, ensuring that the household would enjoy both the flavors and the medicinal benefits of the herbs throughout the cold months. In parallel, the preservation of seeds continued with the grains. Barley, wheat, and oats were carefully threshed, each grain separated from its husk and examined. A fine sieve, woven from willow twigs, was used to remove chaff, a process that required slow, repetitive motion. The grains, once cleaned, were stored in large clay jars, sealed with waxed cloth to keep out moisture and pests. The jars themselves were heavy, smooth to the touch, and cool, often retaining a faint earthy scent from their previous contents. Each jar was labeled with a mark etched gently into the clay, denoting the type of grain and the season in which it had been collected. This method of storage was reliable and simple, and it encouraged a careful, reflective pace, allowing the gardeners to move steadily through their tasks without hurry or interruption. The midday sun rose higher, though the garden remained calm and inviting. The air warmed slowly, and the fragrance of herbs intensified, mingling with the scent of the drying roots and the faint aroma of clay and straw. Occasionally, the gardener would pause to rest, seated upon a low bench or leaning against a post, feeling the sun on their back, the warmth slowly spreading through their clothing. Hands that had been busy with careful work now rested, the movement of fingers slowed, and the sound of breathing, slow and measured, became more noticeable, blending with the quiet murmurs of the garden. It was common that in these pauses, the gardeners would observe the gentle activity of the bees among the lavender, the slow movement of a worm in the rich soil, or the faint shimmer of sunlight on the dewy leaves. Each detail was noted with calm attention, contributing to the steady rhythm of the day. In the afternoon, the attention turned to the organization of the garden for winter. The raised beds, edged with stone or timber, were cleared of remaining plants, and the soil was turned carefully. Wooden trowels and spades, each smoothed by long use, were employed with slow precision. Compost was added, a mixture of decomposed vegetable matter, ashes from the hearth, and finely broken straw, creating a loose, rich medium for the coming season. This preparation was quiet work, unhurried, allowing the gardener to move in sync with the gentle progression of light and temperature. Paths between the beds were swept clean of leaves and debris, leaving the stone or packed earth smooth and even. Small piles of leaves, gathered in neat heaps, would later be used to mulch the beds, protecting the soil and seeds from frost. The late afternoon brought a focus on the storage of winter herbs. Roots such as leeks, parsnips, and garlic were gathered, trimmed, and placed in shallow crates lined with straw. Each root was nestled individually, the straw cushioning it from the weight of its neighbors. The crates were stored in cool, dry cellars beneath the manor, where the temperature remained stable and the air circulated gently through small vents. The process was slow, deliberate, and rhythmic. Each movement was measured, each placement considered, so that the maximum number of roots could be preserved without crowding or damage. The cellars, though dark, smelled faintly of earth and straw, with occasional whiffs of herbs that had been stored in previous seasons. The calm, steady atmosphere made it easy to work at a gentle pace, mindful of the rhythm of the day and the cycles of the garden. As the day moved toward evening, the last tasks involved careful cleaning of tools. Shears, trowels, and spades were rinsed, wiped dry, and oiled with a mixture of animal fat and beeswax to prevent rust. Wooden handles were polished with linseed oil, the process revealing the grain of the timber and smoothing rough patches. Rope, cloth, and linen used in the day's work were folded neatly or hung to dry, returning the garden and its outbuildings to an ordered calm. The air carried the faint, lingering scent of herbs, damp soil, and sun-warmed wood, a mixture both soothing and grounding. And in this quiet order, the gardeners themselves moved more slowly, their steps softer, their gestures smaller, as the day's labor settled into memory and the approaching dusk brought a sense of completeness. By evening, the light had softened to a muted glow, filtering through the remaining leaves on the vines and trees surrounding the kitchen gardens. Shadows lengthened across the paths, and the air cooled once more. The herb houses, the storage cellars, and the neatly tended beds stood ready for the winter months, each plant, seed, and root carefully accounted for. The gardeners walked through the rows one final time, noting the gentle sway of remaining herbs, the glint of dew still clinging to leaves, and the soft sound of distant wind through the orchard. Each step was unhurried, each sound absorbed into the quiet of the evening. The rhythms of harvest, seed saving, and storage had been maintained with steady care, reflecting the slow, measured passage of time in the manor. And in this calm, ordered world, the senses settled, the body relaxed, and the mind followed the gentle rhythm of the garden, moving naturally toward rest. The night settled softly over the manor, and the kitchens, the gardens, and the outbuildings exhaled the last warmth of the day. The crates of roots, the jars of grains, and the bundles of herbs rested in quiet order, protected from frost and damp. The small fires of the manor kitchens burned low, casting a warm glow across the stone walls, and the distant sound of the river moving steadily over stones added a gentle undercurrent to the hush of the night. Lanterns flickered faintly in windows, their light soft and diffuse, revealing glimpses of wooden beams, earthen floors, and carefully stacked provisions. The air carried a faint mixture of dried herbs, soil, and warmth, comforting in its consistency, familiar and unchanging. It was in this gentle, consistent environment that the gardeners themselves retreated, their bodies and minds soothed by the rhythm of the day, their senses steeped in the textures, scents, and sounds of the kitchen gardens they had tended with such deliberate care. And so, as the moon rose slowly above the manor, bathing the walls and garden in pale light, the quiet work of the day came to rest. The seeds waited in their bags, the roots nestled in straw, the herbs suspended to dry, all in gentle anticipation of the coming season. The rhythm of care, repetition, and slow attention had carried the day, providing sustenance, order, and a sense of calm. And in this way, the 14th-century manor and its kitchen gardens existed in a steady, predictable harmony, a world of gentle textures, soft sounds, and subtle scents, moving always with the quiet, enduring rhythm of the earth itself. As the days shortened and the cool breath of autumn began to settle over the manor, the garden took on a quieter, more reflective rhythm. The harvest had been collected, the soil turned in preparation for winter's embrace, and now, in the soft light of the fading afternoon, the focus shifted to the preservation of the bounty. It was in this moment of transition that the careful and deliberate process of storing herbs, seeds, and vegetables for the long winter months began in earnest. The kitchen garden, which had been so full of life and color in the warmer months, now seemed to sigh under the weight of its harvest. The once vibrant herbs, thyme, rosemary, sage, and lavender, were now harvested and bundled into small, neat sheaves. The scent of dried herbs filled the air, a warm, comforting reminder of the garden's growth over the spring and summer. The herbs, once green and lush, had now faded to shades of brown and gold, their leaves curled and crisp under the touch of the harvester's hands. It was common, at this time of year, for the women of the manor to gather in the cool stone kitchen, the hearth still crackling with a steady fire that filled the room with the faint scent of wood smoke. They would sit in quiet groups, their hands moving skillfully as they sorted through the piles of dried herbs. Some were kept whole, to be used in cooking, Others were ground into fine powders for medicinal purposes. In the corner of the kitchen, large wooden boxes, lined with cloth, awaited the herbs. The bundles of thyme, sage, and rosemary would be carefully placed inside, and the lid sealed tight to keep the moisture out. The herbs, however, were not the only bounty to be preserved. The seeds, carefully saved from the best plants of the season, were now being gathered for next year's planting. This was a task of great importance, for without the careful saving of seeds, the garden would not thrive in the coming year. The women would gather around the long wooden table, their hands moving slowly and steadily as they separated the seeds from the pods of beans, peas, and other vegetables. Each seed was inspected, examined for any blemish or flaw. Those that were perfect were placed in small, cloth bags, each labeled with the name of the plant and the year of harvest. The bags would be stored in a cool, dark place, safe from the damp and the freezing cold, until the coming spring when they would once again be used to bring life to the garden. The quiet of the kitchen was only interrupted by the occasional crackle of the fire or the soft murmur of voices as the women shared news of the day. There was no hurry, no rush to finish the tasks. Everything was done with care and attention to detail. The rhythm of the work was steady, methodical, like the turning of the seasons. And as the days grew shorter and the cold began to creep into the manor, the preparations for winter storage began in earnest. Down in the cellar, the stone walls were cool and damp, the perfect environment for preserving root vegetables. Large baskets of carrots, turnips, and parsnips were carried down into the dark recesses of the cellar, where they were carefully placed on shelves, their skins brushed clean of any dirt. The root vegetables, unlike the herbs and seeds, were stored in mounds of straw, which helped to keep the moisture from accumulating and causing rot. The cool, dry air of the cellar would slow the ripening process, ensuring that the vegetables would last well into the winter months. In the farthest corner of the cellar, a section of shelves was reserved for the precious jars of preserved fruits and vegetables. These jars, sealed with beeswax and cloth, were filled with pickles, jams, and sauces, all made from the surplus of the summer garden. The jars were carefully labeled with the contents and the year, so that when winter's chill was at its peak, the household would have access to the fruits of the summer harvest. The sweet smell of preserved apples, pears, and plums, infused with spices, would often fill the cellar, a reminder of the garden's abundance and the hard work that had gone into preserving it. It was a simple, quiet rhythm, one that marked the passing of the seasons and the slow but steady progress of life in the manor. The garden, once a vibrant place of growth and warmth, had now become a place of careful preservation and quiet reflection. The work was not done in haste, for there was no need to hurry. The days were shorter, the evenings longer, and the work of harvesting and storing continued on in the same peaceful manner it had throughout the year. Each task was done with intention, each step measured and considered, as the household prepared for the long months ahead. Outside, the first frosts of the season had begun to touch the earth. The air was crisp, and the once bustling garden was now quiet, save for the occasional sound of wind rustling through the bare branches of the trees. The earth, having yielded its bounty, now lay fallow, resting in anticipation of the spring to come. The cold winds of winter would soon blow across the manor, but for now there was a calm, quiet stillness to the land. The garden had done its work, and now it rested. Inside, the fire in the hearth continued to crackle, casting a warm, flickering light across the room. The women continued their work, hands moving slowly and steadily as they prepared the last of the herbs and vegetables for storage. The scent of dried herbs and the faintest trace of smoke hung in the air, blending with the earthy aroma of the root vegetables in the cellar below. The manor, its work now largely finished for the season, settled into a peaceful quiet as the preparations for winter storage continued, steady and unhurried. And so, the rhythm of life in the kitchen garden continued. The herbs were stored away, the seeds carefully saved, the vegetables preserved, and the work of the manor's people carried on at its own steady pace. There was no rush, no urgency, just the quiet, deliberate tasks of maintaining life through the winter months. The fire in the hearth flickered, and the sounds of the household settling for the night echoed softly through the stone walls of the manor. As the evening deepened, the sounds of the kitchen and the cellar grew quieter, the work slowed, and the first stars began to twinkle faintly in the sky above the manor. The garden, now empty and resting, waited for the spring, when it would once again come to life with the warmth of the sun. The people of the manor, their work for the day done, would settle into their beds, the warmth of the fire still lingering in the air, and drift off into a peaceful sleep, knowing that the work of the kitchen garden had been done with care and attention, and that the promise of another season of growth was just around the corner. In the stillness of the night, as the wind whispered through the trees and the manor rested in the calm of winter's embrace, the garden's rhythm would continue, slow and steady, through the long months of cold. As the last of the autumn light softened into the early evening, the manor kitchen gardens settled into their slower, quieter rhythm. The work of the day had largely been concluded, yet there remained small, careful tasks to finish before the long winter months fully set in. Among these, the preservation of herbs and the storage of seeds occupied a patient and meticulous space in the lives of those who tended the gardens. In these gentle hours, one could observe the manor's gardeners moving quietly among the raised beds, their hands brushing over the remaining foliage, ensuring that nothing was wasted and that the coming season would be well supplied. In one corner of the herb garden, the sage plants, thick and sturdy, had begun to harden slightly in preparation for the chill. Their leaves, still green with faint traces of summer, were plucked one by one, held in careful bundles, and brought toward the drying racks that had been prepared near the edge of the garden. The racks were simple constructions, made of seasoned oak, their surfaces lined with woven reeds to allow air to circulate. Each layer of herbs was spread evenly, so that leaves would not overlap excessively, allowing them to dry at a gentle, steady pace. The gardeners moved slowly, taking care not to bruise the delicate leaves, for bruising could lead to a faster loss of aroma and flavor. The scent of sage, earthy and slightly sharp, mingled with the fading sweetness of thyme and the lingering floral notes of chamomile. The air in the garden was rich with these fragrances, each inhalation calm and steady, as though the very essence of the season was being captured in the bundles of herbs. Nearby, the lavender beds were already partially harvested. Lavender, which had bloomed for months in soft purples and blues, had been cut carefully with shears made of wrought iron, their blades smooth and well-oiled. The stems were tied in modest bundles of a dozen or so, using strips of linen taken from worn garments. This reuse of materials was common in the manor, a quiet testament to practicality and thrift. Once tied, the bundles were hung upside down on a slightly higher tier of the drying rack. The scent of lavender, more subdued in the cooling air, mingled with the warmth of late afternoon sun lingering on stone paths. In this way, the herbs of the garden were not only preserved for winter use in cooking and medicine but also for simple pleasures, such as fragrant sachets to line the chambers of the household. At the edge of the garden, one could find the preparation of seed saving. The gardeners worked with the remnants of annual plants, parsley, coriander, and fennel, gently shaking the mature seed heads into small, flat baskets woven from willow. The seeds, tiny and varied in texture, fell slowly through the fingers, each one handled with care. These seeds would be stored in linen or parchment, kept in wooden boxes with tight-fitting lids to protect them from moisture and pests. In the cool air of late autumn, one could sense the quiet satisfaction of this practice. Each seed a promise of the following year, each measured handful a continuation of a rhythm that had persisted for generations. It was common that some seeds were reserved for trading with neighboring manors, a small economy of sustenance and careful planning that moved as quietly as the wind through the trees surrounding the manor. On the stone terraces that ran alongside the kitchen garden, small heaps of harvested roots and bulbs were being sorted. Carrots, parsnips, and onions had been dug from the soil with the curved edges of spades, their roots gently brushed to remove excess earth. These were then examined for firmness and size, the larger, healthier specimens selected for storage in cool, dry cellars. The smaller or misshapen vegetables were sometimes left for immediate use or for the animals of the manor. In this way, the cycle of nourishment and preparation extended quietly, each item handled with care and attention. The smell of the freshly turned earth lingered faintly on hands and clothing, grounding the gardeners in the tactile, calm reality of their work. Within the main house, the preparation for winter continued in parallel. Herbs that had been drying on racks were carefully removed once sufficiently crisp. Sage and rosemary, once dry, were bundled into small sheaves and tied with strips of leather or linen, then placed on shelves in the larder, which was lined with boards of pine to allow for air circulation. Often, the larder was a long, narrow room with a low ceiling and small windows, the stone walls maintaining a gentle coolness. The bundles of herbs rested alongside jars of preserved fruits, pickled vegetables, and honey, each item arranged to allow a view of what was available, as well as to keep the air moving around them. This slow arrangement was a daily ritual, a gentle task that extended over hours, and one that required neither haste nor force, only a careful attention to detail and a calm, rhythmic repetition. During these quieter hours, the manor kitchens also saw the preparation of winter storage for perishable herbs. Parsley, cilantro, and chives were gathered and placed in shallow baskets, sprinkled with a light layer of sand or ashes to preserve freshness. The baskets were moved to cooler areas of the kitchen or the pantry, away from direct heat, and were checked periodically. This practice, common in 14th-century households, relied on careful observation and experience, ensuring that herbs remained usable through the cold months. In some cases, herbs were stored in tightly woven pouches, made from linen or hemp, and hung from ceiling beams to maximize air circulation. The scent of dried herbs hung softly in the air, a muted, calming fragrance that lingered around the hearth and throughout the stone corridors of the manor. The repetition of these tasks, day after day, created a rhythm in the household that was both practical and meditative. Each gardener and household member had their own particular role. One might sort the seeds, another might sweep the stone paths, and yet another might inspect the racks of drying herbs. Often, people would pause to enjoy the quiet sunlight filtering through the leaves of the remaining garden plants, the gentle rustling of wind in the trees blending with the distant sound of water from the manor's well or the slow drip of rain from the eaves. It was in these moments of calm observation that the full scope of the work could be appreciated, not as hurried labor, but as an enduring practice of care and continuity. As the late autumn days shortened, the garden's activity shifted subtly. Early mornings began with mist clinging low over the soil, the dew catching on the edges of rosemary leaves and glinting like tiny beads of silver. Gardeners would move among the beds slowly, pulling weeds or collecting the last of the ripened herbs. Each plant had its own season and rhythm, and part of the gardener's task was understanding the nuances of these cycles. The process was never hurried. It was common that work was paused to let the mist lift, to allow frost to retreat from the tender shoots, or simply to observe the garden in the quiet light of dawn. This attentiveness ensured that nothing was overlooked, and that the integrity of each plant was maintained. By mid-morning, the sun would climb higher, casting a soft, golden glow over the stone walls of the manor and the wooden fences of the garden. The gardeners often carried baskets lined with straw, soft against the delicate herbs, and would move slowly between rows of mint, thyme, and marjoram. Each step was measured, each movement deliberate, as hands brushed gently over leaves to check for ripeness and readiness for harvesting. In this way, the daily rhythm of the garden was maintained, a quiet repetition that echoed the larger cycles of the manor and the natural world beyond. In certain areas, specialized herb beds were used for medicinal plants, including burrage, comfrey, and hyssop. These were treated with particular care, as their properties were well known to the household. Leaves and flowers were harvested for teas, poultices, or simple infusions, often in quantities small enough to be dried on a single tray, rather than on larger racks. The gardeners would note the time of day when harvesting these plants, as sunlight and moisture affected the potency and aroma of each species. It was common that these herbs were collected in the early hours, before the sun reached its peak, so that their qualities would be preserved. The scent of dried hyssop, mild and herbal, mingled with the warmer, earthier aroma of comfrey leaves drying nearby. In the afternoons, the practice of seed cleaning and storage often took precedence. Seeds from herbs and vegetables were separated from chaff, dust, and remaining plant matter by gentle rubbing and sieving. Small wooden sieves, often carved by local craftsmen, were used for this purpose. The resulting seeds were examined closely, any damaged or underdeveloped seeds set aside for immediate use or discarded to prevent contamination of the stored collection. The remaining seeds were carefully labeled with the plant name, the year of harvest, and any observations about growth patterns. These notes, sometimes written on scraps of parchment and tied to small bundles, created a record for the following planting season. It was a quiet, deliberate activity, one that required patience and a steady hand, as well as a calm attention to detail. Once the seeds were prepared, they were stored in wooden boxes lined with dried moss, sawdust, or linen. The boxes were kept in dry, cool areas, sometimes in cellars or under eaves where moisture was minimal. Each box was arranged to allow air to circulate and prevent mold or decay, and the contents were rarely disturbed except for seasonal checks. The practice of storing seeds in this manner was common across manors, a testament to careful planning and an understanding of natural preservation. Over time, these collections of seeds would provide the foundation for the following year's garden, ensuring a continuity of growth and sustenance in a rhythm that was both quiet and reliable. Evenings in the manor brought another layer of calm work. The drying herbs were inspected once more, and any that had reached full dryness were transferred to their long-term storage areas. Small bundles of lavender, rosemary, and thyme were tied and placed on shelves, while the remaining sage and chamomile were left to finish drying slowly. The household kitchen would be filled with these gentle aromas, the scent softening the cool air and providing a sense of order and comfort. Candles, often made from tallow, provided a warm, flickering light as the gardeners completed their rounds. The shadows cast by the bundles of herbs created a gentle pattern on the stone walls, a quiet reflection of the day's labor. By nightfall, the garden itself was quiet. Frost often began to form on the edges of the leaves and along the stone paths, glinting in the faint light of the moon. The gardeners had long since retreated indoors, leaving the herb beds and seed trays in their careful arrangements, each item in its place. The rhythm of the day had concluded in a slow, methodical manner, leaving a sense of satisfaction that arose from attention to detail and patient care. In these moments, one could imagine the same routine repeating year after year, season after season, a steady continuity that linked the people of the manor to the land and to the cycle of growth and preservation that defined their lives. And so the night settled over the manor and its gardens. The bundles of herbs rested quietly, the seeds lay safe in their boxes, and the root vegetables were stored in cool cellars, each item positioned for maximum preservation. The gentle scents of dried rosemary, sage, and lavender lingered in the air, mingling softly with the cooler night air that drifted through partially open windows and small cracks in the stone walls. The garden, now dormant under the pale moonlight, reflected the careful work of the day. In this quiet, measured space, there was a sense of calm completeness, a satisfaction in the slow, deliberate rhythm of preparation, preservation, and care. Through the long night, the manor's kitchen gardens remained in a state of restful vigilance. The stored herbs and seeds would endure, awaiting the return of spring, while the gardeners and household rested in their chambers, enveloped by the gentle warmth of the hearth. The quiet work of the season had been concluded, and in this calm, measured conclusion, there was a gentle assurance that life would continue according to the steady, comforting rhythm of the manor and its enduring gardens. And in this way, the story of the 14th-century kitchen gardens comes to a gentle pause, a lingering moment of calm and quiet, the soft, earthy aromas of herbs and the steady promise of seeds for the next season wrapping the manor in a peaceful, timeless embrace. The night continues, slow and steady, as all rests beneath the careful watch of the gardens and the quiet rhythm of life in this medieval household.